Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Curry, and I'm the editor-in-chief at the Journal of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners. And I'm delighted to be with you today. I'm speaking to you from Tampa, Florida, where it's 7 a.m., 7 o'clock in the morning, and I know that most of you are calling from places that you're in the evening right now. So this will be a lot of fun, I think. It's nice to speak with you at this distance, and I have some great stuff to go over with you today about submitting manuscripts and getting manuscripts accepted. So I want to get started with you and have a couple of slides that I want to go over with you first about the the services that are being provided today. So first, I want to just speak for a minute about a couple of these branded slides. And this talks about Editage. It's the world's leading provider of specialist scientific communication solutions to researchers, publishers, academic societies, institutions, libraries, and other corporations around the world. There's a global team that comprises editors and linguists, trainers, communicators, and publication support experts with specialized backgrounds for any kind of work experience that is needed. There are personalized services that are delivered by over 3,000 experts, and they cover over 1,300 academic subjects and all types of academic documents for you. And now Editage is bringing Researcher.Life. And with that, you can hopefully save some time and improve your productivity, increase your chance of paper acceptance, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. That's one of the services they provide, staying on top of the latest research, learning from other successful researchers and things like that. So it's kind of an organic ecosystem of products and services that is curated for researchers around the globe and all stages of research and all types of designations and specialties. So I wanted to make you aware of those services. And now today's topic is going to be about manuscript acceptance and just pet peeves that might lead to manuscript rejection and how to avoid those. So here's our program today. And the purpose of the program is to focus on ways that you as authors can become informed about a journal's scope and their guidelines to ensure correct journal selection and targeting. We're going to talk some about that to make sure that it matches your manuscript. So the emphasis is going to be on enhancing your interaction with the editor and your interaction with the online author information at each journal that you might select. And so I'm going to be highlighting some classic mistakes that authors make that you can avoid to enhance your chances for manuscript screening and favorable review. All right. So we have four very specific objectives we're going to talk about today. The first is we're going to discuss the importance of understanding the journal's scope. It sounds obvious, but maybe not so much, and how you can target a journal for submission of your manuscript. Then we're going to identify some key areas of the author guidelines to understand, to make sure you have incorporated those into the manuscript. We're going to review the role of query letters as an important option to really optimize the match between the manuscript and the journal and ensure you have that match. And then we're going to spend some time talking about ways to avoid some common mistakes that people make throughout that whole process and when you're interacting with the editorial staff and the publication staff at a journal. Okay? So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to get to know the journal and then some mistakes to avoid. All right, so why is understanding the journal scope important? I'm going to give you some examples of that. So think about the scope of the journal as really the main theme of the journal or the kind of exact coverage that a journal has. And it takes a while, I think, for authors to get comfortable with the concept, maybe that if you have a lot of journals in your field, every one of them has a niche, right, that they're trying to fill that makes their journal unique in that way. And the journals, that's a key component of their identity. And so the editors of the journals are sensitive to that, and that's their job to kind of watch out for that. So manuscripts are at some level accepted or rejected based on whether you have matched the scope of the journal. In fact, at my journal, the Journal of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, when I go into my author decision letter, we'll talk about that whole process, but when you get to the point of making a decision, one reason that you can select is this manuscript does not match the scope of our journal. And it's not uncommon for me to have to make that selection. So that's someone who has not understood the scope of our journal. And we'll talk about how you can do that. Also, it's really important for you to understand that if you work in a field like mine, of course, I'm in the nursing field, and in our field, there are a number of journals, even just within the United States and certainly internationally, there are hundreds of nursing journals. So it's very, very important for people to understand what is the specific journal I need to be looking for based on the subject matter that I'm writing or have written about, right? So all of us editors are looking for the very best fit in submitted manuscripts. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. I work in the field of the nurse practitioner role. So that's an advanced practice nursing role that we have in the United States and, of course, in several other countries around the world. But not every country has an advanced practice nursing role. And so our journal is an international journal. We accept submissions internationally. We have editors internationally and things like that. But we do get submissions from authors that have not read that scope, and so they might send me an article on a nursing role. It's a perfectly good article about, professional nursing, but it doesn't have anything to do with the advanced practice role. So that would be an example of where something did not match the scope at all for our journal, so we could not consider the manuscript, right? And in my field of nurse practitioner, there are two other generalist journals, right? And crazily enough, we all have very similar titles, which I know that can be confusing for authors, but it's a historical thing, right? So we want to make sure that all authors read each of our journal scopes because we are all a bit different. In my case, at JAANP, we are the science journal. We focus on original research that supports the role of advanced practice nursing. The other journals are more clinically focused, and they do a great job. They're both nice journals. We all talk as editors and stuff and refer people to each other. And so those journals focus on more clinical types of topics and review articles and stuff. And so it's nice to have those as options, but you don't want to, as an author, submit to the wrong journal because it's just going to take up your time, right? So my background as a writer is as a generalist. My area, I'm a family nurse practitioner, and so I do research in the area of primary care. And as you can also probably see from my background, I do some research in nursing history, and I've published some things in that field. And having those two focuses of my scholarship has made me even more sensitive to this topic because in the field of primary care, I have so many journals that I can pick from, and I really have to think about, okay, where could this particular topic go within the vast, scope of nursing journals out there. But in my field of nursing history, there are very few places to go. And I always think about that because as a professor of nursing, a university that I worked at, I had two good friends. One was in the field of history and one was in the field of mathematics. And so we would always talk about how many more options we had in the healthcare field in terms of journals to select from. And they had very few options ever for, relatively speaking, of where to get published. I felt very fortunate working in my career field, but you do have to spend more time thinking about that journal, that specific journal, and how do you pick a journal and what is their scope. All right, so let's talk a little bit about JAANP as an example of that. And this is our journal. We're a strictly online journal now. And here are two statements about the journal that you can easily find on our journal website. And such is true with all journals, right? So whether the journal is print or not, they're still going to have a website where you can go and read about the journal, or just pick it up and read it if it is a print. So, so the scope of the Journal of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners is it's a monthly scholarly peer-reviewed journal for nurse practitioners. It is the official journal of for all members of our association. So our association has over 130,000 members. So the journal has a wide circulation, and that's great for us, right? So that tells you a little bit, okay, you get the idea, okay, this is only for nurse practitioners, right? So if I'm an author, if my subject matter isn't nurse practitioner, okay, maybe I should look elsewhere. But also it's a scholarly journal. It's a scholarly peer-reviewed journal. So is what I'm writing representing that level of scholarship, right? So then you read a little bit further, because this is how we have it broken down, and there are 2 more statements we'll read on the next slide. Read a little bit more further and you see our aim. Our aim is to be the leading research-based scientific journal, providing cutting-edge information in practice, education, advocacy for the role of nurse practitioner, research, and leadership for all nurse practitioners and others with an interest in the nurse practitioner role. Hold on just a minute. I'm just making sure I'm checking my chat. Okay. So that gives you a little bit more information about this is a research-based journal. So for example, if I have written a generalist article or a viewpoint piece, right, a commentary, something like that, gee, maybe that is not the journal for me. Let me read a little bit further, right? So here's a little bit more information on the journal. So the readers of JAA&P include the members of our organization, other nurse practitioners, clinicians, and researchers who work in domestic and international settings. So that tells you the journal is international, and we do accept things from any country, right? The journal supports the mission of the association in empowering nurse practitioners to advance quality healthcare through what we call PEARL, practice, education, advocacy, research, and leadership. So any of those themes might be appropriate for our journal. And the goal is to support nurse practitioners. So anything that advocates for or represents the advancement of our role is something that our journal is going to be interested in. Does that make sense? Okay, and then core values. The American Association of Nurse Practitioners has core values that promote integrity, excellence, professionalism, leadership, and service. It's reflected in the way our members embrace advanced education, lifelong learning, and the continued evolution of our role. And our journal supports that by expanding the scientific knowledge of nurse practitioners. So that is our key role within that organization, is to advance the science within the nurse practitioner role and at that level of professional responsibility as healthcare providers, right? So now you're getting a clearer picture of what our journal does, and you could contrast that with a journal that says we provide useful clinical updates to practicing clinicians, and that is a scope of a related journal. That's a great scope. Those are good types of journals also, but you can kind of see the difference there. We're looking for more original research as opposed to quick clinical updates or review articles of current information that's previously published. Does that make sense? Hope so. All right, so I see a couple of questions in the chat, and I want to just address these really quick. And the first one is, what about the index of a conference? In other words, I can check the journal using SJR and know all the details. Considering the question, what should be the important factors related to the conference to be sure that it's an important one? So you're saying, how do I make sure I'm matching to a conference as opposed to a journal? I think that's, if I understand the question correctly, that's what it's saying. And I agree with that too. You also have to match your content to a conference. And I have, from presenting at conference, I would just tell you my personal experience. I'm not an expert on that because I'm not a regular conference organizer at all. But I would say that contacting them directly and looking at, when they put out a call for abstracts, you really have to adhere to that and stay within their theme and their mission. I've just submitted an abstract to, there's a nurse practitioner faculty big group, and we had to make sure that our focus that we wanted to put addressed one of their key themes. I think that may be what you're talking about, right? And the second comment up there was, my manuscript was rejected by stating inappropriate. What does it mean? Well, I'm sorry that you had that experience, because whoever said that to you should have given you more specific information. I would assume that they mean it's inappropriate for that journal, which means it's out of scope, but it's hard to tell that from just that one word, isn't it? When we send out a decision letter for rejected for scope, it specifically says our journal has a focus on the advanced practice nursing role, and your material doesn't address that role, and therefore it doesn't really fit our journal. So you need to get some helpful information like that. I would not be afraid to email that editor. I mean, all they can do is just not respond to you. I would write them back and say, could you give me some tips on what might make my manuscript more appropriate? Or, did you feel like it fit with the journal, or whatever? Ask them a couple of questions, and they're either not going to respond or they're going to give you some more information that might be helpful. And I think that's a great question, because I actually have had that happen to me several times. It happens occasionally, because we do try to include enough information if we indeed don't take a manuscript. We don't get a lot of those questions, but I did have an author group that sent me a manuscript that just was not polished enough, and I said, we're not going to be able to take the manuscript. I think you need to work on it a little bit more, and maybe consider doing this, that, and the other. And we've had a lot of manuscripts like this submitted, and she wrote me back and asked me some more follow-up questions for some more specific information, which I was happy to give her. So I think that it never hurts to approach the editor and say, hey, can you give me some tips or some more specific information? And just ask them, of course, you're going to be courteous about it, but just say, was it a problem with the research or the content, or whatever it is that you're thinking they might be addressing, and let them give you some more direction there. All right, now I want to talk about a key point that we're bringing up in all this, right? So when you write, you want to write with a journal in mind. I know a lot of us, I certainly did, as a beginning writer and researcher, even if it wasn't a research piece, right? I would write something because I had a passion for something. I had a topic that I really felt needed to be addressed, and I'd write a manuscript, right? And then I'd start looking around for, gee, where should I put this, right? And that's the wrong way to go about it, isn't it, right? So you want to think about, okay, what's my theme? What's my topic? What's my area that I'm going to be studying? And then immediately think, okay, now where should that go in print? Think about it that way from the very beginning. Why? Because it's going to save you a lot of time, right? You want to style your manuscript according to that journal. So every journal has a different style. They may look very similar, but there's differences there, right? So the style of the outline of the piece that you're writing, how do you outline it? How do you flow from beginning to end? The referencing style might differ. Have you ever had to go back because the first journal didn't take your manuscript, and then you had to go with journal B, and it had a completely different referencing style? We'll talk about citation software a little bit, but that's kind of a pain, even if you use citation software. So try to think about, what journal am I going for, and use that referencing style, and then also use that writing style. Here's my trick about matching to a journal's writing style. If I have targeted a journal and think this is the perfect manuscript for this journal, there's a few more things I need to do, right? But once I've targeted that journal, I am going to find an article on some similar theme, or at least a similar type of manuscript. So let's say I did a quantitative research piece, right? Okay, let me find a recent article published in that journal, in that journal style, clearly, because it's published there, that has that same type of characteristic. It's quantitative research, it's whatever. I'm going to pull that thing, and I'm going to reference it repeatedly while I'm writing my manuscript. I'm going to say, oh, okay, now let's see, do they like a short results section, right? Do they like additional references in the discussion section? You can get all kinds of tips like that. And what does that do for you? When that editor gets your manuscript, they're going to say, oh, I can picture this being in our journal because it already kind of fits, right? It's in our style. And they get that you understand the journal, and that you're going to, do what it takes to make sure you're the best fit for that journal. So they're gonna more favorably view that manuscript because you've taken the time to understand what you're submitting to, right? Okay, here's another question. Would you say that sometimes there's favoritism or politicking when some editors accept papers, even if it's blind? I would assume that in some cases maybe there is. What you have to understand about some of that stuff is, to the editor, eventually nothing is blind because the editor has to look at certain things legally, authorship and stuff like that. So blinded review, is something that we and most journals adhere to very strictly. It's double blinded. The reviewer doesn't know who the author is. The author doesn't know who the reviewer is. Many journals such as ours have that type of review process. Although, there's a trend in the industry to have more open reviews. We don't do that. But at some point, the editor is going to see that. What the editors should be basing their decisions on is the journal scope and the journal mission, right? And not who wrote it. So we like to think, I was going to talk about this a little bit later, we like to think that our seasoned author groups, especially, academics and stuff, are going to really knock it out of the park, right? But they don't always do that. I'm going to tell you as an editor that I don't care whether it's a student or someone who's a full professor. I'm going to take a look at the quality of that writing, and then we're going to go from there. That's what you need to be looking at if you're a journal editor. And I've had some student papers that were awesome, and I have fantastic, and I've had papers from large faculty groups that were just not ready for prime time. They're just not fully baked. They're not ready to go. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, from my perspective, when you're working with an authorship team, you have to blend it all together into a cohesive whole. And not everybody does a good job of that within their team. Maybe it's personalities or whatever. I'm not sure. Yeah. So that's what I would say about that. Okay. And then the next question is, in the case of a rejection letter with comments, is it wise to write back and justify comments that may have already been addressed in the manuscript? I think what that may be talking about is that occasionally there will be something that's missed in the manuscript that actually was covered, and it was given back to the author as a criticism when actually the material was covered. I think that it's always okay to write back. I mean, always meaning we don't really like it, here's why. I mean, other than an out and out rejection that says we just don't consider stuff like this at all, you can always write back and ask for a reconsideration. And I have been in groups and I have seen groups that got a reconsideration. They got handed a rejection letter, but they were able to renegotiate with the journal. So I think that you're well within your rights to do that. Yeah. What do you think about publishing in newly founded companion journals? Okay, that's another good question. That is an up and coming thing. We don't have a companion journal, and I'm not an expert on that. What I would say to you as an author is, it depends on your goal as an author. Publication is great. Getting published is great. I've worked in 2 different major universities, and one, the goal was, we are a teaching university, and we want you to get published. We want you to write high quality manuscripts and have a track record of publication. Did you do that? Okay, great. Thank you very much. We're done. Congratulations, right? The other one was, oh, you got published? Okay, what kind of a journal was it? Okay, where was it? Okay, what was their impact factor? On and on and on. So it depends on your career goals as to whether that is a good choice for you or not. There are lots of up and coming journals. There's always new journals coming out, and it takes a while for a journal to get an impact factor, right? Because it's based on your track record. You don't have a track record, you don't have an impact factor, things like that. But remember that an impact factor is just one metric that speaks to journal quality. It isn't the be all and end all. There's a very popular journal in my career field that doesn't have an impact factor. It's been a journal for a really long time, but they don't have an impact factor. And the people that publish in that journal are great writers, but their goal is not to be that type of writer that the decision about their career depends on the impact factor of the journals that they publish in. So it depends on you as the author, right? Okay, the next one is rewriting with the journal in mind. How can you do that when reporting research results, especially when it gets rejected at the first, second, and third journal? Well, that is a tough one. That may be a case where you need another set of eyes, I'm thinking. What is the reason for the repeated rejections? There's a talk I do on friendly reviewers and casual editors and stuff like that to me, that paper needs another look. There's a reason why it's getting repeated rejections, and it's possible that the author or the author group involved in that paper, you know how we all are as authors. I've written this paper, I've poured my heart and soul into it, and I'm sure it's the perfect thing, and then you find out that it's not, which we 99.9% of the time do find out that it's not. It's a rare day when anything is submitted and then just accepted, right? So you need to have somebody else take a look at that, take a long, hard look at that. Is not, you know, you lose sight of the forest for the trees because you're so involved in the details of it. That's what I would think. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the next one is, I'm an early researcher. How I'd like to know what makes the manuscript. How can I publish from my original thesis? Yeah. Yeah. And aquatic science. Oh, what an interesting career field. Yeah. Theses and dissertations, and even in nursing, we have a clinical doctorate here in the States and in some other countries. And boiling those things down into a publishable manuscript is incredibly difficult. I've helped a PhD student boil an entire dissertation down into a publishable manuscript. It is not easy. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's another case where you, the writer, that is your baby, right? And so you need somebody else to help you do that. I would definitely call upon a colleague, an advisor, somebody like that immediately before you even get started to say, okay, you need to take these major sections out. You know, let's pick our journal and then talk about what we need to cut out of this to make it into a publishable paper. Is publishing in medRxiv before sending to a peer-reviewed journal advised? If you're talking about preprints, most all of us do take preprints. Previously published information, no, but preprints, almost all the journal editors that I know find preprints perfectly acceptable because it's not a post-publication, it's a pre-publication. Right. Which indices would you recommend for worldwide recognition of your work? You know, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that because I'm writing from my own perspective in the United States. In terms of worldwide recognition, I would think about things like impact factor, but I'd also think about how I'm out there as an author, right? ResearchGate and Google Scholars and stuff like that, even if it's LinkedIn. Those are some of the services I know for authors that get you some recognition and possibly some contacts, and then also presenting at conferences of your colleagues. So I'm sorry, I'm not a very good authority on that, but that's my perspective from my career field. Sorry. Okay. What do you think about using web pages to search appropriate journals, such as Find My Journal? Are they secure and trusted to search appropriate journals? Okay, I've actually got a slide on Jane, so I'm gonna march on and I'm gonna address that just a little bit. Okay. Don't want to run over on our time here. I could talk about this stuff all day. Okay, here it is. Yeah, how about that? Good timing on that question, right? So here's an example of searching for a relevant journal. And I have to tell you that a lot of times I do get manuscripts from authors or author groups that are not really a good fit for my journal. And this is one of the things that I recommend in the medical field. If you want to search on thousands and thousands of journals that are included in PubMed, right, you can use this service called Jane, the Journal Author Name Estimator. It's completely free. And I love to go in there, and the author might send me an abstract or at least the theme, you know, a couple of sentences on it and stuff like that. You can put whatever snippets of that you want into Journal Author Name Estimator and hit Find Journals, and it will pop up with a list of journals that are, you know, the best match, moderately good matches, whatever. And that kind of helps you narrow down your journal search. And our journal is in there, for example. So I can see where my journal is in the list of possible matches for that material. And the authors are really appreciative when I tell them that here's a way that you might be able to find a good fit. So I might get something that's very highly specialized that would not appeal to most of our readers, for example, or maybe something that's very specifically holistic, or something that needs to go into a different type of journal that's really useful to people. Here's another good recommendation. Talk to your colleagues, especially if you're kind of on the beginning of your writing career. You have colleagues that know lots of this stuff that can guide you to journals. I've gotten tons of help from my colleagues in times past about, oh, I never thought of that journal. I just wasn't familiar with it. I read certain things every month, and a lot of stuff I just don't have the time to read, right? And another good tip to me that I also used is when I'm pulling up references, when I'm doing my background literature review for my article, I keep seeing the same type of journal or maybe the same journal name pop up a few times, and I'm thinking, wow, well, they obviously publish a lot of stuff on this. I wonder if they'd be interested in mine too. Now that can kind of backfire on you a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, when you're dealing with a journal that's in a specialty, or if they've had a lot of submissions on that particular topic, they might say, so sorry, I've just gotten 3 of these in the last 2 months or something like that. But at least it's giving you a clue as to a journal that is related to that field. So you might want to do that. Okay. Right. Another question, when applying at universities for teaching positions, they ask as a requirement to have author articles published in the best ranked journals, right? Right. How to know if the journal is one of the best ranked? That is a good question, because you might assume that it's always based on the journal impact factor, but I would make sure I understood that university's expectations, because universities can be very different that way. And they might say, well, all of our psychology faculty publish in XYZ journal. You wouldn't have known that, right? You have to do some research on that and make sure you understand the ground rules at your university, because as I mentioned in my own example, they all differ. One of the universities really did not care. This one obviously cares very much, right? And so you need to say to them, when you say ranking, are you talking about impact factor, or are you talking about the highest level of specialization? So, in nursing, it could be cardiovascular nursing, it could be cardiovascular intensive care nursing, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to approach the department chair about that and make sure you understand the requirements for you. What are common research themes that are valid to be accepted in journals? I have to say that I don't think there really is one. I think that every course journal has its own, as we mentioned, scope and themes. So what I would do is, if you're thinking about a particular research topic and you want to write on it for publication, that's the time to start researching what journal is going to be a good fit for this, right? And we're going to talk about query letters in a minute, which is another good way to figure that out, right? How does one write a conceptual paper? I'd be happy to talk about that sometime, but I don't think our time is going to permit that today. I'm gonna pass that one by right now. I'd be happy to chat with people separately about some of this stuff. And the next one is, some journals demand a high APC, but as a citizen in the global South and low-income countries, how can we publish our paper from reputed journals, or how can we publish in reputable journals, right? I know the challenge that is. I'm mentoring someone in South America right now, and she cannot get anything that is behind a paywall. As we call journals that you have to subscribe to, and our journal is actually a hybrid journal. Some things are a pay-per-view and some are not. And so I can appreciate the struggle of those of you in countries like that. It is a true challenge, and I think that there is a movement on, as many of us have seen in Western Europe, to have requirements for open access, especially for research. A lot of funders are now requiring that the results be published in an open access journal for that reason, because they believe all researchers should have access to it. So I think there's more to come on that. Okay. Here's another very interesting and good question. Does a journal provide an added value if it's affiliated with a national or international society? For example, the European Society of Virology. Right, and my journal is a society journal, right? It's the Journal of the American Association of Nurse Practitioners. My real answer to that is no, not necessarily. If by virtue of the journal quality, it has a big impact and it is considered a well-respected journal, that should be coming from the intellectual content of the journal and not from the society itself. However, the societies have a role in determining what is the scope and breadth of the journal. And so in that sense, the society might have an impact on it. But just because it's affiliated with society, does it have a better view? No, I don't think anybody would say that. It's the quality of the journal itself. Okay, now we're going to talk about author guidelines for a minute. And already I feel like I need to speed up a little bit here, but these are great questions. I enjoy your questions, right? All right, so after you have thought about picking that journal, once you have targeted a journal, you want to spend the rest of your time in those author guidelines. They should always be available to you online. I want you to remember that author guidelines are unique to each journal. They may be similar, but each journal has its own guidelines. They're often very extensive. You can go on our website and see our author guidelines. There are pages of author guidelines, but that's to help the author. It gives you extensive information on exactly what you need to do to submit the manuscript for publication, right? So there are detailed rules for you to follow. They are monitored very closely by the editor. If things don't follow the guidelines, they should not be going in the journal, right? And so again, they're a common reason for early rejection if they did not follow the author guidelines. If I get a manuscript that has a completely different outline, that tells me two things. One is it should not be going into the journal. It's going to have to go back to the author. And number two, this person did not do their research on our journal. I don't know why they picked us, because they don't know us very well. They haven't even looked at our author guidelines. So be very careful to follow closely the author guidelines. This is where you're going to spend your time once you have chosen the journal. I love this next question. Is it possible to simplify the submission process? I'm going to take you through the submission process in a minute, because a lot of us as authors think, oh my goodness, I'm so happy I finally finished my manuscript and I'm hitting the submit button. Now I'm done. You've just begun, and we're gonna talk about that in a minute. Right? Okay, so I'm going to get to that next question about student papers in just a minute, but in the author guidelines, you will see there's going to be detailed information on how to format the sections of your manuscript, guidelines for the submission process overall, right? What to do after submission, and the acceptance process. That's what we have in our author guidelines, because as you can see there, submission, there's things that happen after submission, there's things that happen after acceptance, so it's all a big process, and you need to understand that when you get into it, right? So here's some examples of just the formatting part, right? What font do you use? How long can your manuscript be? Very important to follow that one, right? Because we all have to produce pages, and pages cost money. You can't take up extra pages, right? The referencing style, that's a very time-consuming thing. Tables and figures, how do you handle them? Where did they go? The cover page and abstract, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Those are very key things, the cover page and the title, especially, and the abstract. Keywords, how do you choose keywords for your article so that it can be discovered and therefore cited, right? Supplemental content in our journal, and like a lot of others, we can put supplemental content online, and that gives you a place to put additional information. How to handle acknowledgments to people that you want to thank who are not authors, and then how to make sure you've covered your statement about conflicts of interest. So those are all important things about the author guidelines. And here's just a couple more things I want to talk about with that. So the key areas are the article type. Okay, so for example, in our journal, the article types include quantitative research, qualitative research, other research or mixed methods, health policy analyses, innovations in education, and then there's a couple of other article types. So what does that tell you as an author? Okay, I'm looking at Kim Curry's journal, right? And oh, I see that I've written something that doesn't fall under any of these article types. Gee, maybe this is not the correct journal for me, right? Or oh, I thought that this was, you know, a quantitative research piece, but I can see that it really fits more under education. So it helps you out with classifying your article, right? And then again, those word limits, do not exceed the word limits of the article, because there is a way that you can say what you want to say within the word limits. Trust me, okay? And then the reference limits. Are there limits on how many references you can have? Just make sure you check that. So the author guidelines give you even more information about the types of manuscripts that the journal will and will not consider. So if you think you might want to write for the Journal of Cardiovascular Health, right, then you're targeting that journal. So okay, now I've got my journal, let me go to the author guidelines. And then you might find out that, you know what, this is really not the best fit. So make sure you spend enough time in those author guidelines to really understand them. All right, so I want to talk about a few key reasons for rejection. We already talked about one, right? Remember what that was? That it's out of scope for the journal, right? The second one is failure to follow the author guidelines. Always make sure you understand them, right? Then there's just a couple more that I would say. One in my journal is the science is bad. right? So they've written a research article. It's a very small sample size. Perhaps the conclusions they came to don't match with their findings. You know, they just have not followed the science through. They haven't thought it out. Maybe their statistics are inappropriate. You know, there's things like that. Make sure that someone is watching over the science. That's very key. And then the other one is just simply the writing is not good enough. They may have done a good study, but it's not communicated well at all. And I want to go back and say again that it doesn't matter whether this is your first paper or you have a long career as an academic researcher and writer. It doesn't matter to the journal. You've got to get those things right or you're not going to have success with the journal. Okay, so the next question is, as a student, should I aim lower when choosing a journal to build up my name? Or even journals with high impact factors would accept the paper from someone that's not a researcher as long as it's well written? I would absolutely say the second one. Like I've said, it doesn't matter to me, and I don't think most editors care about anything. If it's a science journal, you're supposed to care about the quality of the science, right? And I think most of us really, really do. We want to put the best science out there. Why? Because that helps our journal and it helps our people who read our journal. They need this good cutting edge information. And so that's what we focus on. I take papers from students all the time, and I turn away papers from people that are more experienced all the time. You've got to get the science right. You got to get the writing right. Okay, the next one, does manuscript suitability inquiry really matter from the editor's perspective? So you mean like a query letter? I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Yeah, it might make a difference. Yeah. Is it common for a journal to follow the peer reviews recommendations provided by the author? Okay, so it's for peer reviews, the editors, I certainly do, adhere very closely to the peer reviewers, because while I have screened the manuscript, I have not always read every bit of it in detail, and I might not be a subject matter expert. So let's say they send me something on psychiatric mental health medications, and that's not my area of expertise, right? So I'm going to really rely on my peer reviewers for that. So I'm going to trust their judgment. And we all cultivate our own bank of peer reviewers that you are familiar with our journal, right? Regarding word limits, some of my colleagues have been able to submit articles which exceeded the word limit. What are the cases in which editors allow such instances? In my journal, there is no case. We have a page count limit, and people have to adhere to the page count limit. So, I mean, if editors want to make that exception, that's up to them. Maybe they have more pages available, but I wouldn't count on that. I'd try to adhere to the word count limits, right? Predatory journals, you know, that's a good question. How to avoid predatory journals? It's sometimes a little bit difficult to tell. It would be great if in everyone's career field they had a list of highly regarded journals and journals that were vetted. We're fortunate in nursing. We have a big international association called the International Academy of Nurse Editors, and they maintain a list of highly regarded nursing journals, and they add things to the list and take things off, you know, every year. So I recommend a process like that if you don't have one in your career field, because you do have to watch out. Sometimes what you can do is look on the website and look at where the editors are, the contact information for the journal, the amount of guidelines. We used to say if they charge a lot to publish, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. There are a lot of journals that do charge, and so it's difficult to tell, and it really depends on your career field how you investigate that. Okay, if I oh, my chat just went away. Let me go back. Okay, if I make a mistake, no, if I do research about human behaviors, how can I find appropriate and relevant information? I think on the journal, right? Where can I find the best sources? Oh, I see what you're saying about like on your literature review for that. Yeah, I'm not a subject matter expert on that, but it's a great question. How can you find the best background and referencing information to support your own research on human behaviors? What I would do if it was me is, if you are working in an academic setting, I strongly recommend that when you start out as a writer that you work with a writing group and get some mentoring from people who have done research in that area. I can't say enough about writing in a group to guide you as an early writer. It can help with your style. and it can help with all the judgments that you have to make, including things like the reference list. Okay. Now, here's a good one. The role of query letters. This is our third objective, right? So I recommend that you write a journal editor a query letter. They can save you a lot of time because you might find out right away. I see this all the time. Here's my topic. Here's what I'm planning to write. Would your journal be interested? And then it turns out it's not within our focus area. It may not even be within our scope, or it's something that I have gotten a lot of submissions. Many of our journals, including ours, receive a few hundred submissions a year. Some of them receive a lot more than that. And so your timing may just be off. And that's a good time to find it out, because then you can move on to the next journal without going through that whole submission process and then just getting a rejection. That's a very discouraging thing to have happen. So I really support you writing a query letter, right? It also gives the editor a heads up. Oops, here comes someone, right? And I can give you some direction on that you might want to take, give you better chances for success and stuff like that. And also, if you get the manuscript in and I'm looking at it and thinking, that sounds kind of familiar. I wonder if they sent me a query letter, and I go back and they have sent me a query letter. I'm going to give that person a chance because they took the time to ask me, would this be okay? And I've said that's okay. So I'm going to take a good look at that before I send them back, comments, right? So common mistakes to avoid. So let's get on to our pet peeves here. Mistakes to avoid in query letters. Writing a really long query letter. I don't necessarily need to know why you wrote this. I don't need to hear the blow by blow of the research. Just simply ask me, here's the type of article, here's the topic, something short and sweet, right? Don't talk a lot about who you are. Don't spend time talking about, again, why you wrote it. Just tell me what it is and let me help you with it, right? And then don't tell me I'm going to write an article on myocardial infarction. Would you be interested? That's not enough information, right? So give enough information on the article type, right? Is it research? Is it not research? What is the big point that you're trying to make? And then let me go from there. Yeah. Okay. All right, so got a lot of questions coming in. I tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my two final slides with you, take a few more questions. I want to make sure I don't take up too much of your time, but I'm hoping this is helpful for you. Yeah, and then I'll get to some more questions. All right, so we're going to go on to our final objective, avoiding common mistakes. So we're going to talk about the whole submission process, right? So remember that when you're submitting something, the whole process is you write it, then you submit it, and then the editor screens it. I do a lot of that, and I give it right back so that they can make changes before it goes to peer review. When I do that, it's helping the author make a more polished paper so the peer reviewers may not reject it. Okay. When it comes back to me after screening changes, it goes to peer review if it's taken at that point, right? If the peer reviewers like it, they'll always have some suggestions for changes. So then it comes back for revision. You should always expect that. Never think that when you submit something, it's just going to be accepted. That pretty much doesn't happen. Expect it back. You're going to get some feedback. You're going to make some changes. That's all good, right? So then you're going to resubmit it with the changes. And if you have good luck, eventually it's going to be accepted. After it's accepted, it has to go to copy editing and layout, right? So then you're going to get that version back. And that's your last chance to make sure that paper is perfect and it looks perfect. And then eventually it's going to get published. So I want to make sure you understand that that's the process. It's just not hitting submit and everything's okay. It's going to be an ongoing process for a while, right? So as you're going through that process, you write the query letter. You don't make it too long or too short. Think about Goldilocks. It needs to be just right. Plan the letter carefully. Take time to get it right. Another thing with regard to that is make sure you address it to the right editor. None of us like to see somebody else's name on the query letter, right? Right, the submission process, when you submit it, there's all kinds of forms you got to fill out. You got to fill out all the forms. It's about conflict of interest, authorship, all those things, right? Check your email. Check your email from the journal. Make sure you're staying on top of that, because otherwise it's going to get lost out there in the ether, right? All right. Cover letter on the manuscript. Again, make sure you get the editor's name right, that when you submit the manuscript itself, it's supposed to sometimes come with a cover letter depending on the journal. Make sure you know the name of the journal. Make sure you know the name of the editor. Pay attention to your detail. That says you're detail-oriented. Submit the paper with an author dispute. That is a really bad problem. You should not write anything until you have established authorship. If you have a list of authors, You have got to make sure everybody understands their job and that they do their job, or you cannot write the paper, because you're going to have an author dispute, and nobody will take a paper with an author dispute. All right. Be very careful about authorship. There's lots of rules out there on authorship. Okay. And related to that is other ethical problems, like you didn't get research approval, you didn't credit someone else's work, something like that. So there's an international group called the Committee on Publication Ethics. They have guidelines. You can go to publicationethics.org, I think it is, and you'll find all kinds of nifty guidelines to guide your writing and make sure you get things right ethically. No journal wants to get into an ethical problem, so they're not going to take those things. Right. And I just want to talk about a few more common pet peeves, and then I'll be able to answer some more questions. All right. So again, I cannot stress enough the author guidelines. The second one is, it's kind of a little joke. The train of thought has derailed. The article has to flow. It has to be logical, right? You have to go from the concept to the themes about the concept to a logical conclusion. Make sure that your article is well organized. Don't use slang or jargon words. We all want to use our own slang. I do too, right? But if it's for a broader audience, you can't use slang. You have to spell everything out and make sure you're appealing to the widest audience possible. Abstract and title not matching the paper. When do you write the abstract and title? Absolutely last, right? Then follow the author guidelines. Is it a structured or an unstructured abstract? Make sure the abstract and title reflect what the paper actually came out to be, right? And then another thing that's a real pet peeve of mine is people who use emotional language in a scholarly paper. So if someone sends me a paper about a common problem and they call it a crisis, I don't really like that. It's a problem. If somebody says, oh, this is awful or this is wonderful, that's someone who's trying to appeal to my emotional sense, but this is a scholarly journal. I don't want you to appeal to my emotional sense. I want to see your science. So that's a red flag to me that someone is not writing in a scholarly manner. Okay. And then please don't expect anyone else to correct your references. Use citation software, use EndNote, Mendeley, use it in your word processing system. Always use those things to make sure that when you send in that paper, it's polished and it's as perfect as possible. Okay. All right. A query letter and a cover letter. Those are two different things. A query letter is something you just informally email to an editor before submission. A lot of submission processes, though, ask for a cover letter to precede the manuscript. So when you actually submit, you would write a more extensive cover letter. So those are two different things. Then I've got a question. If the study was done in a particular city, is it possible to publish in an international journal? Yes. I mean, we do things like that. It all depends on the journal and the editor. If you're saying it's a local study, well, it depends on the sample size, and the possible ability to generalize that to other settings might make it appropriate to publish in a broader journal. Right? Do many journals still have a bias toward positive results? I think many journals do still have a bias toward positive results, and I like to publish things with negative results because you know why? Why should we keep researching something that isn't working? That is helping a lot of people who have research agendas not do research that isn't necessary. So we need to spend more time publishing negative results, right? Okay, a journal is included in JCR reports has an impact factor of 4, which is great. I mean, it would be in our field. That's a really high one for our field. Listed in major databases. Can it still be a predatory journal? I mean, not in my experience. I would perhaps do a little bit more research on where that, make sure that impact factor is the real impact factor if you're concerned about that. I've never heard of something like that happening, so I wouldn't think so, but always go to the journal website and look at other indicators of validity, like who's the editor, who's on the editorial board, is it blinded peer review, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Okay, I've graduated with my master's recently. Are there journals in the field of information assurance which accept manuscripts from former students with no university affiliation? That is not my career field, but I'm not aware of any journals that only take things from university faculty. In the medical field, I'm not aware of them. So I think it might be good to ask one of your faculty mentors that question, someone who's very, very familiar with that career field. Well, it makes sense to ask the peer review process to be quicker. Well, you can always ask. We have we give people 21 days. And you know, these are all busy people, and so they have to calendar their review. And you know, a peer review takes several hours to do a good peer review, especially of a science topic. It takes several hours. So I would, if I'm in the position of being an author, you know, you have to think about the power balance there, right? And so it's the journal that has the kind of lion's share of the power in that situation, and trying to pressure a journal to publish something faster is probably not a good tactic, right? Anything wrong if the article is accepted with no required changes? Wow, it's kind of a miracle where I'm standing, but I think it would be great. It's always possible, you know. People put a lot of time into things, and it may just really hit the mark. That's fantastic. I think it's cause for congratulations. But on the other hand, if it wasn't peer reviewed, you know, you got to think about what your goal is. Is it in a scholarly journal? Hopefully, it got peer reviewed. Okay. Should I consider the average time of acceptance of a journal when choosing one? If yes, is there any useful website that has that kind of info? You know, in my career field, it's usually something that is closely followed by each journal, like how long is our turnaround time, because they want to make sure they're getting people processed. But they don't usually share that a lot. You could query the journal, but if it was me, I would not consider the average time to acceptance. I would consider, what is the best journal I can get published in? Let me try for that. That's what I would consider. And again, you know why peer review takes time and stuff. So, you know, let them do their thing in a high quality way. Right? Can I add some references in the cover letter? No, you have to put your references in your manuscript. Yeah, you want to make sure that'll be clear to you in the author guidelines. Some journals require the references to be on a separate piece of paper. Some require them to be attached to the manuscript, but I don't know of any journals that let you put them in the cover letter. You got to put them within the manuscript and put your citations accordingly. Okay. What about International Journal of Nursing Studies? Do you have any idea how long it takes? I'm a little bit familiar with that journal, good journal, but I don't know what their lead time is for publication. I'd like to also say that a lot of us journals have a good problem, which is we get a lot of submissions, and that adds to that time. So if it's a competitive journal, you may be looking at a little bit more time, or you may be looking at something like our situation where we have an online now or a publish ahead of print feature, but when it comes to the monthly issues, we're dealing with a little bit of a backlog. So the articles are coming out. You're getting a DOI number, so you've got a publication you can put in your CV or in your resume, but it may not have hit a monthly journal yet. I think there are other people in that situation too. So there's reasons for all those things. Yeah. Is it possible the editor can make a contrary decision in spite of peer review decision? Yeah, I've seen that happen. Something comes to light that wasn't known before, or there could be a timing problem. Unfortunately, if you're dealing with a situation where there may be more than one editor, like there are associate editors on the journal, and there are too many things coming down the pipeline on a given topic, and one is deemed acceptable, but others are deemed excellent, the editor could end up saying, you know what, we're just unfortunately not going to be able to take this one. So that I can see the scenario where that would happen, right? All right. Can an editor reject the paper after minor revision? You know, I've seen that happen too at other journals. I think the kinder thing for an editor to do is to go ahead and just screen out the manuscript before it goes to peer review, because what's happening there is you're taking up peer reviewer time, which is very valuable, and then they're not available as reviewers for a while, and then you're rejecting the manuscript anyway. And I can only imagine a few scenarios where that might be needed, you know, to happen. So it's better if the editor just makes the decision up front that, look, let's just stop this right now and let them go on to another journal and not take up everybody's time anymore. That's a better thing to see. Can a paper be rejected because it's too basic? Not that the question it addressed wasn't important or the design wasn't appropriate, just that it was too basic for that journal. I've definitely seen that happen, and I can understand that. And so really you have to take that on yourself in terms of, what journal did I target? Did I really understand the journal? And did I find other manuscripts like my manuscript, or is it just not the best fit? Another good reason for a query letter, because that hopefully could have been cut off earlier, and you could have gone on to a journal that was a better fit for your material. Yeah. And then, how do you choose reviewers for your journal? Any advice to authors submitting to journals requiring authors to suggest peer reviewers? Right. Our journal allows authors to suggest if they want to. I don't always pick them because sometimes it looks like they know the person pretty well. But here's my advice to you. If you want to be a good writer, volunteer to be a peer reviewer. All right. We choose reviewers from people who volunteer to be peer reviewers, and we have several hundred on our list. And we always need good peer reviewers in our career field of advanced practice nursing, right? People with statistics knowledge, people with knowledge of certain specialty areas. So we need a lot of reviewers. But you got to understand that writing and peer review really go hand in hand. And if you are critically reading by peer reviewing, you're going to be a much better writer. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to read just a couple more slides to you from our sponsor here. So this is on Puncture, and that's a manuscript optimization tool that checks your paper for language and plagiarism and references and all that stuff. So it helps you publish faster. And so for a free report, you can upload a manuscript and they will run a detailed analysis on it for you. And this assessment is also going to include language checks, grammar, non-native construction, word choice, writing style, all kinds of good things. It'll review your score and report for submission readiness. And you can upgrade to a pro report also and get language improvement suggestions and a Turnitin plagiarism check report. Always a good idea to do a plagiarism check on your own manuscript. All right. I just want to thank everyone so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope this was useful.